Welcome back. It is exactly 18 after 8 o'clock, and we're going to be talking about the worrying situation. And I do say worrying because you wonder, with that many people unemployed, what are the repercussions for the country? Does that mean higher rates of criminality? We do know that hunger and poverty and food insecurity issues are going to be highlighted in a very, very big way. We're going to be talking with senior economist, and that is Dick Forslund. And let's hear what he has to say about this very worrying situation. Mr. Dick Forslund, good morning. Welcome to the program. And I'm sure you are as worried as I am. And I guess the big question to ask is, what is government, how do we hold them accountable for this situation of an unemployment rate sitting at almost 35%?
Yeah. So good morning, Julie, and good morning to the listeners. Yes, I am very worried as all of us. I think you can hold the government accountable to the austerity policy that they are pursuing, uh, uh, which was sharpened now again by the midterm budget 1 month ago. So they are embarking on a plan to cut the jobs also in the public sector when it comes to uh, health workers, teachers, police. So the plan was adopted in February, and you can even, when it comes to national employment, you can even read the figures of how the reduction in the so-called headcount will take place over 3 years. Uh, it's like 22,000 jobs in the different kind of national employment, like the police, where the plan is to reduce it with 18,400 jobs over 3 years. And when it comes to the provincial employment, as you know, the provinces are responsible for health and education, and there another sort of reduction in headcount is coming of 32,000 jobs. So the government is not helping the situation, and also the so-called wage freeze in the public sector employment is not helping either, because you don't have any economic demand in the economy, when you don't have any economic demand in the economy, if people employed are paid too little across the economy, then businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, cannot thrive, especially not after these huge sort of shocks to the economy by the lockdown and so on. So I think the austerity policy is something that really has to be attacked by all progressives up until the budget now in February. They have to turn around that. You can't contract the economy, you can't shrink public sector spending with over 10% over the coming 3 years, and at the same time face this extreme employment crisis.
Okay, when we look at the public sector, it's not as if it is bloated. As a matter of fact, I think certain or possibly all sectors are underserviced. Health services, teachers, the police force, because whenever you're trying to engage with the police, for example, they either don't have enough vehicles or they just don't have enough staff to make a call when there's an emergency call put out to them. So I'm wondering what's behind the austerity policy, and undoubtedly the other issues that are also in back of mind is, for example, Eskom wanting to raise tariffs, electricity tariffs. It's going to be that much more expensive with 35%, almost 35% of the population unemployed. How do, and even the petrol pumps, I mean, petrol went up in price last night. I think we possibly one of the highest paying, a fuel paying citizens, one of the highest fuel paying citizens in the world. And when we look at our unemployment situation as well, possibly also one of the highest in the world. If nothing else is done by government or other civil society interest parties to boost up the economy, we're in for a very, very gloomy time ahead of us.
Yeah. No, there's no measures taken to boost the economy. It is the opposite. To the government, and to those who support this policy, to them the rationale or the thinking behind this, they have some kind of belief that a smaller share of the public sector of the whole economy will kind of bring in the private sector and it will start to thrive. I mean, that is some kind of the belief they have. So the public sector, they say, should not crowd out the private sector, but it isn't working. And I mean, it's also the small public sector is also a base for corruption of the public sector, because there are certain things that really, really needs to be done, and but these things are put out on tender instead of being insourced. So if you have sort of all the people who think that they are entrepreneurs or they want to start businesses, a lot of them should instead be managers or heads of the public department, which deals with the leaking water pipes, the sewage, the running in the streets, the repairs of local roads, and the repairs of schools, the building of new schools, and so on. That is typically public sector responsibilities, and it shouldn't be outsourced. It only sort of increase the it becomes kind of like a public-private partnership, where the public sector is paying corrupted or bloated prices on such necessary things. So that is the thinking behind this. I think is basically wrong. And a country like South Africa is not a small country in Europe, where the working class usually is getting by, and you have other you are focused on the big problems like climate change, which is also even a more extreme problem coming and already here in South Africa. So you have to have the public sector also lead a transition to a low fossil fuel economy in order to use renewable energy and stop using 90% of the electricity is produced by coal power stations. And the private sector will not sort of solve that dilemma for us, where you have urgency of hunger, urgency of unemployment, and then you also have the urgency of combating climate change. Eskom's finances, they are bankrupt due to corruption, due to the plan of selling Eskom 20 years ago. So you didn't do the maintenance of the power plants, and there's many other factors. The big demand for coal in India and China also made the prices for Eskom to go up. And then you have the corruption, of course, that's still going on at Eskom. But I mean, you can't solve the financial problems of Eskom by taking money from the budget, as the Treasury do now. This year it was sort of 34 billion rand in grants to Eskom, and next year it will be 25 billion rand in grants to Eskom from the budget. And this is motivating them the cuts in the public sector, in public sector services. There are, and we have said it many times from Alternative Information Development Center, where I work, we have said it many times that you have a large fund where you should have sort of interest, you should have lending from the state pension fund, the GEPF, at low interest rates to Eskom and to the Treasury, because they are running with a yearly surplus of 60 billion last year, always having these surpluses, and 2 trillion rand invested, 2 trillion rand in investment, half of that on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is completely sort of in a frenzy. So when everybody else is in crisis and thinking about unemployment, then you have the all-time high on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So if you're a financial speculator, yeah, then you think that things are going, well, at least going well on that side, but it's completely detached from the real world. So the trust for privatization and the austerity policy and the higher and higher interest rate of the Reserve Bank, which is the plan they have now, all this has to be reversed. And I think we have to build some kind of opposition or a social movement to stop austerity.
Okay. You spoke about the government pension fund. Last I heard about it was that it was also on the brink of collapse. So I'm not quite sure what's that situation like. We need to look into that. Factors that have impacted on our high unemployment rate, we know was the lockdowns, the COVID lockdowns. And then what we didn't need, the worst imaginable, happened in July with the insurrection. That
Yeah,
truly created huge damage to our economy. And I think possibly more than 50% of the people that were impacted by that insurrection will never be able to find a job, because some businesses will never be able to recover and get back onto their feet. So, having said that, the insurrection, COVID, the austerity policy, a few years ago, we heard about the government's very fancy plan of the NY, the National Youth Development Program, creating jobs. Haven't heard a thing about that thereafter. Lots of money was pumped into that initiative. How do we go forward, knowing that we're sitting at almost 35% as an unemployment rate? Undoubtedly, this is going to create spikes in crime. How else are people, I'm not justifying it, but how else are people going to put food on the table? What do you believe is the answer to all of this? As an economist, and coming from obviously Europe, how you've been in the country for a while now, but you probably can see the situation from a different perspective. What's the answer?
yeah. No, I'm a Swedish national, and I've been here in the country for 11 years now. So maybe politically, I'm still not understanding everything that is happening, and this is one of the most unequal countries in the world. But I mean, one thing that you observe as coming from abroad, and if you are an economist, that is I mean, this high unemployment rate, it didn't start with all these shocks that we have experienced for the last 2 years. It was very, very high already before that. I mean, if you would have such an unemployment rate in a land like Sweden, which I came from, the government would resign. I mean, there would be new elections, and you would concede that your economic policy had failed, and we have to think in a completely different things about. But this is not the case here, and it's a lot of things in the politics I don't understand. But one thing that you observed was the low worker wages across the board in the country. So you had when it comes to the so-called value added that they created in the industry and the production of goods and services, you have the share of labor going to labor, the share that's going to wages of this new value created is much, much lower in South Africa than if you look at the other world. So I think that is the result of a divided and a weak trade union movement, and the fact that the democracy only have been here for 20-25 years, but also the turn to a conservative and neoliberal economic policy that the governing party decided upon at the end of the 1990s. So I think that created this situation. So I think that sort of media and the general public and those who are creating sort of ideas and propagate sort of how to do things, leading news anchors and so on, I think they should be much more positive to the demand of trade unions. And I think that the trade unions also have to create a much bigger unity, because if you don't have any economic demand in the economy from the broad masses, so to speak, if you don't have a sort of a broad consumption, then you can't have domestic businesses growing and thriving. There's no customers. There's no working class family who can save money every month to buy a fridge or some kind of household appliances, and then we will not have a very small such industry in the country. So that is one structural thing that is behind the high unemployment rate. And then the economy also, of course, cannot stand against the shocks like the pandemic or the riots in July and so on. One background, of course, was the faction fight in the governing party. But this faction fight, it found a very fertile ground when people are going hungry and they feel deprived of everything. So thousands of people took the opportunity in order to fill the cupboards and the fridges at home, and I understand that. You need a shift to another mindset, and I really believe you need a shift in the government, but that both take care of the ecological crisis and the climate change crisis, and use that also as an opportunity to create new jobs when it comes to renewable energy, so that we can have the so-called just transition to a completely different economy that isn't using fossil fuels to burn everything. But you can see now about protests coming on the Wild Coast here, where they are letting Shell explore for oil and gas in the sea. Mm-hmm. That is typically a project that we have to oppose. This is not the way to grow the South African economy. You can't solve a problem with another problem.
Okay. Mr. Dick Forslund, a very, very sobering discussion. Lots for us as South Africans to think about. We do hope that the powers that be have, listened to these type of messages and work hard to turn this economy around. I guess it's going to take a couple of years before we see a turnaround in our economy. Thank you indeed for your time. It is exactly 8:35 a.m.
Yeah. Thank you and good morning again.